Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with the Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask all the questions that we can. You can also visit us at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, where you can become a bitter pill and get some stickers and all of that kind of thing. We're introducing some new tiers by the summer, I'm hoping, and moving from there. My guest today is a friend of the show. He's been on before. He is the author of The General Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. And last year, he released the book, Injustice, the Story of the Holy Land 5 Foundation. The last time he was on, we talked about that specifically, that book specifically, I mean. And then today he's going to come on and we're going to talk about quite a few things, but we're going to go ahead and kick it off with Miko Peled. Miko, are you there?
I am. I absolutely am. Good to be with you again.
Be with you again too, sir. Happy New Year, and glad you're healthy and happy. Yeah. So let's get into it, man. We talked a little bit before we got started, and there's some new developments, I guess, or at least some milestones with the HLF-5. Let's jump into it.
Well, this last November was their the 10th anniversary since their incarceration, and we're starting a campaign called 10 Years Too Many, 10 Years Too Long, I mean. Mm-hmm. And I think that people in America need to be aware of the story. People in America need to rise up and scream at the top of their voices at the horrifying injustice that took place. I mean, this is a story of such a miscarriage of justice, of such persecution of good people who happen to be Muslims and Arab and Palestinians. And two of them, of the five, are in for 65 years.
Jeez.
One of them for 20 years and the other two for 15 years. And when you're 65 years old, 15 years is a long time. Hmm. So I encourage people to study the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. My book is called Injustice. Get it, read it, let other people. This is for the benefit of 5 innocent men who are sitting in federal prison. In the most horrifying conditions, with the most horrifying treatment, and they're innocent. They're absolutely innocent. So I encourage people to study, learn about this, and realize that a miscarriage of justice of this proportion has taken place, and it's not the only story. But this was a like a pillar of these guys are pillars of the community,
right?
And it had enormous impact. And to act and to talk to their members of their elected officials, there's a lot of new members of Congress being sworn in next couple of days, tomorrow actually, in Washington D.C. Call them, talk to them, send them the book, tell them about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
10 years too many, 10 years too long.
Well, and then and the last time we had you on, we talked about at the very end of the Obama administration, he could have easily just pardoned these guys. And you and I both know that worse people have been pardoned by presidents, and yet he did nothing. Yeah, or at least commuted their sentence and deported them. He could have done that. There was quite a campaign, and there were several heads of state that were willing to accept them and give them citizenship. I mean, who wouldn't? These are such wonderful people. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't do it. And he wouldn't do it because of a political calculation. I mean, for a Democrat, even if he's out of office and even if he is, doesn't have to run for office again, people have long memories. And the Democratic president who will commute a sentence of 5 convicted, even though they're wrongly convicted, right,
Palestinian Muslims in connection with terrorism and financing of terrorism. And plus, this would be a slap in the face of the Justice Department that pretended that this was some major victory.
Right.
They were able to unearth and convict these 5 men, and of course it wasn't. It's all complete nonsense. These are innocent men that did nothing wrong. So he could have, and he didn't. And now here we are again. And it's like I said, it's 10 years too long. And I really hope people get the book and talk to their friends and talk to their neighbors. And yes, they're Muslims, and yes, they're Palestinians, and yes, they were accused of financing Hamas, but they weren't. And yes, the government of Israel believed and supported this, by the way, and sent a lot of information supposedly to corroborate and to help with the conviction, but it was all based on lies, and it was all based on deceit and false evidence and terrible witnesses and things that should not have been allowed in a court of law. And so, if we don't speak up and if we don't help these people, nobody will.
And I've read your book, by the way. Last time we talked, I specifically read your book, and the government of Israel doing the 180 during the basically both trials was shocking. That's a good word for me to use, because they actually condoned their activities. These guys checked in. They dotted all the I's and crossed the T's. They were not reckless.
No, they had permission to work. They had permission. They had an office in Jerusalem, and it was approved by the government of Israel. They had all the licenses. They worked only with other organizations that were licensed by the government of Israel. This is before there was even the Palestinian Authority. And then later on, they were authorized by the Palestinian Authority. So in other words, these are organizations that the State Department worked with. In other words, they were completely legit. But after 9/11, somebody had to be taken down, and these were the obvious, the obvious suspects. And so they said, Muslims, Palestinians, money going, charity going over there. We have a case, and that's exactly how flimsy it was. And when you read the book, what I tried to do in the book, I think I mentioned this to you last time, I probably read 20,000 or more pages of transcripts, and I would have put them all in the book so people can read and see just what takes place in a court of law and what the judges permitted and how they got these guys convicted. It's horrifying, but I was able to put, of course, some of the transcripts in the book so people can read it and just judge for themselves if they don't think that this is outrageous.
Right.
But it is outrageous by any measure. I mean, there's no measure by which these guys, the conviction of these guys was justifiable. And like I said, it's not just that they're innocent men. These are some of the finest human beings I have ever met. And I met a lot of people in my time. And they're sitting in federal prison with a bunch of killers and thieves and child molesters and God knows who else. Yeah. Where they could be out here in society contributing, which is what they wanted to do, this is exactly what they dedicated their lives to contribute to society. They didn't only help Palestinians. They were there after 9/11. They were there after the Oklahoma City bombing. Right. They sent money. They gave blood. They did everything. They were overseas in earthquakes and floods. And in other words, these are caring people.
Right.
So again, I said it probably 3-4 times already. The book is called Injustice, the whole story of the Holy Land Foundation. Get it, give it to your friends. People should read the story. I mean, there's a little bit here and there about it online, but nobody's taken the time. It was a tough book to write. It was a tough story to put together because it involves so many different things. It's not a long book given the density of. No. I mean, you read 20,000 pages, and in reading the book, you pack a lot of information. I think it's not even over 200 pages. It's like, you really pack a lot of info. And that was a challenge. Yeah. To make sure that you get the right info in. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm very happy because the families of these guys, gave their blessing to the book, and the guys themselves, they all got a copy, and they they approved what I put in there. Of course, there's always more that you wish you could have put in, but to pack in that whole, I tried to explain a little bit. Okay, what is Hamas? What are the Muslim Brothers? Why are we afraid of all of these things? What do they mean? Where do they come from? What is this conflict between Israel and Hamas? How does it all fit in? Because all of these things were thrown out there in the courtroom, and there's no way the jury could have understood what was being said because you don't have that requisite knowledge. Mm-hmm. And most people on the outside, this is being demonized, so it's got to be bad. That's being demonized, that's got to be bad. So, but what is it really? What have they done? What do they really believe? What have they said? So I tried to put some of that in there too to give people context, so they really understand what this is all about.
Wow.
And it's about Palestine.
Well, yeah. Well,
at the end of the day, it's about Palestine.
Well, and that was my next. I was going to ask you. I had a friend in town, and we, kind of got into it. A good guy. He's been a guest on the show before. Doctor in American history, and the last couple of years, I love him to pieces. I've known him over 30 years, but the last couple of years, it's almost like this new administration has stolen his critical thinking skills. And we were talking about Palestine and all that stuff. Israel. My dad's Palestinian, so I don't have a dog in the fight emotionally, but I know it. And we started talking about the various IDs, for example, and he's just like, well, you got to keep those people out. They're going to bomb it with civilians. So what did the people of Gaza do besides being Palestinian? What crime did they commit besides being Palestinian and born into a land that got taken over in 1948 illegally? And he just kind of stalled. He goes, what do you mean IDs? I go, yeah, there's like various color IDs. You and I talked about that on the show a little bit. I read about it in your book, and I did a little research, and I wanted to kind of jump into that a little bit. But the bigger question I wanted to ask you, and I know the answer to this, but you're the expert, so I'm going to ask you. Why is it so easy? I mean, in World War I, we demonized the Germans. Then we got bored of that, demonized the Russians for 20 years. World War II, demonized the Germans. Came out, demonized the Russians again, right? We had a nice long Cold War. And then in the 90s and everything, we started demonizing the Arabs. 9/11 happened, demonizing the Arabs, and now we're bored of the Arabs. Now we're back to the Russians. But why is it so easy to give Islam a bum rap? I mean, why is it so easy to just, make these guys look like the swarthy, Hun and scare the shit out of people?
Well, I don't know that it's easy. It is... there are a lot of resources being put into that. I mean, the reason it's happening is because a lot of resources. Mainstream media is totally invested in the demonizing of Arabs and Muslims. Israel, which is like America's best friend, and for some, all kinds of reasons, Americans look at Israel and say, well, they understand these things. They're the experts. Of course, is pushing very, very hard for this, not only in America, but all over the West. The BBC is just as bad as CNN and some of the others. So I don't know that it's easy, but a lot of time, many years, and billions of dollars are being invested into the demonization. So and it's very well planned. The graphics are right. They know how to do this. In other words, they've got experts that know how to do this. It's basically a big publicity marketing scheme to demonize an entire population, and that's why it's so successful. I mean, and the struggle that we have is that, and I was just having this conversation with someone. I agreed to do a debate when I was just in London. I agreed to do a debate with a member of this rabid pro-Israeli Zionist organization in the UK, and typically people on my side of the issue, including myself, we believe in boycotts, and boycott means we don't engage. Mm-hmm. But I came to the realization, I decided to do it because I came to the realization that the difference between, say, Zionists, and this is people who believe in the existence of Israel and what Israel does, they have legitimacy in America. In other words, when you say to most Americans, does Israel have a right to exist? They say, of course they do. Jews need a place to live, Is Israel legitimate? Of course it is. Everybody remembers that they gave money to plant trees and they think they made the desert bloom and all these kinds of things. Now, the problem is that this mythology, and that's really what it is, it's mythology and a campaign of lies. It's been going on for a long time. Is still around. In other words, it still has legitimacy. If you talk to people about KKK, even if they are racist, they kind of cringe. You talk about apartheid, the way it was in South Africa, even people who are racist cringe because they lost their legitimacy. They have no legitimacy.
Right.
You talk about Zionism, you talk about Israel, people go, yeah, they're wonderful. They're Jews. They fought. They won. They beat the Arabs. They're fighting terrorism. In other words, it exists. So I thought, okay, what's important is, not that I convinced the other guy, because that's not going to happen, and I made it absolutely clear this is not dialogue. I'm not trying to bridge some gap with these people. But the audience hears both sides.
That's right.
And it's very easy, if you know your stuff, it's very easy to show that people who support Israel knowingly and know what is happening there and understand it are racist, that the very foundation of the state of Israel is racism and violence and apartheid. But you can't do it unless you engage.
Right.
So on the one hand, I believe in boycotts totally. On the other hand, once you do this in front of an audience, and even if the audience is small in the room, you film it, you post it, you get 200,000 views, you get 1 million views very quickly because this is a hot topic, and that's exactly what happened in my case. We have a short. We put out a short clip of that, and it's got 200,000 views or something.
Nice.
So you do it for that. So in other words, this argument is important. This is valuable, so that people can hear. And then a lot of people who are on the right side of the issue don't know the facts. Not everybody has the requisite information and has read every book about Hamas and Gaza and all this, right? Mm-hmm. But those of us that have, and those of us that are on this side of the issue, we have a responsibility to stand up there, not always say, well, we're not debating them, they're racist. Make the point that they're racist. Today, people know that apartheid was racist and wrong because a lot of people stood up and did this. And we have to do this. This is our responsibility. And Zionism, I don't know if you saw, or probably some of the listeners saw, the epic movie from 1960 called Exodus, based on the Leon Uris story of Exodus, of that ship that brought the poor Jewish refugees from the Holocaust to the Holy Land. And it is so pathetic and so romantic and heroic in a way that makes you want to puke. But that is what created the image. That is that, and everything since then, and before that as well. Years and years of demonizing the Arab, years and years of pitting Arabs against Jews, which of course is historically completely wrong, because Arabs and Jews actually got along very, very well. It was the Christian Europeans and Jews that persecuted Jews, not Arabs.
Right.
But who cares about the facts when you've got this great story? So now we're combating the story, and we have to stand up and combat it. I mean, I don't think we're legitimizing the other side when we're debating them. I think it's quite the opposite. We're demonstrating why they must be delegitimized, why it's wrong when Chuck Schumer stands up in the Senate and wants to present a bill to criminalize people who support or call for boycott or divestment and sanctions against Israel, and he wants to put people in jail and fine them $1 million or something.
Right.
Why this is absurd. But how is it that a major, powerful, important senator in the U.S. Senate can stand up and do this? Of course, it's not very easy. It's not being very successful.
No, it's not. But the fact that he does not get lambasted in the mainstream press is the same person I was talking to over the weekend. I kind of set him up and asked a trick question because we were talking, and I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. What do you define as a theocracy?" And he said, "Well, like a place like Iran or Saudi Arabia." I said, "Right. They declared them to be an Islamic country." And there is a difference of rights between the Muslims and the non-Muslim, right? He goes, yeah. I go, well, Israel just did the same thing. They declare themselves the Jewish state. Hebrew is the official language. And there's several IDs that Palestinians have. And he goes, well, that just must be for people in West Bank and Gaza. I go, no. The Israeli Palestinians have a different ID. And, there's the blue ID, there's the green ID, there's 2 or 3 different versions of each. You can't get married to somebody in the West Bank if you're in Gaza. It's like that is just complete fascism.
Yeah, and speaking, and speaking of the Senate, speaking of Congress and our elected officials, there's the Betty McCollum's bill to support to HR 4391, which hopefully will come back, in this session and with great support, which says that U.S. money cannot go to military installations that detain Palestinian children.
Wow.
So I mean, and that is very difficult to get through this, the previous Congress. Let's see what happens this Congress. She's got, I think, like 30 co-sponsors, and we're talking about kids, and we're talking about Israel detaining minors and torturing them and beating them and putting them in facilities that are not appropriate for children with no access to their parents or to lawyers. I mean, talking about terrible conditions, right? So she's saying, let's make sure that the Secretary of State know that this is wrong, and we're not going to let that happen. Not that we need to stop giving money to Israel, but we don't want our money to go to that. Right. And it's a pretty benign bill. But even that is impossible, and talk about children. What is it here that we can't agree on? And I was at the office of one congressman just last week, and it was explained to me. It was explained to me that this congressman feels that this bill will not help bring the two sides together, and therefore he is opposing this bill. And that's not what we came. It was Jerry Connolly, from Virginia. But we weren't there to talk about that. We were talking about, so this just came up, and the meeting was over, and we didn't really talk about that much. But I'm going, how could somebody reach that conclusion? How does a member of Congress feel that making sure that American taxpayers' money does not go to something that is inherently illegal and immoral, which is the detention of minors for political reasons as security prisoners. Not even that they commit a crime, but they're So how does that not help? How do you justify not supporting that?
Right.
But this is a reality in America that now we're up against, and this is that's why a show like yours is important, and that's why talking about this is important, and that's why standing up and exposing these people is important, because otherwise others won't know.
No, 100%. Well, I mean, and even when Obama did offer any sort of tepid, and I use the word tepid as it's intended, criticism of Israel, I mean, he got lambasted for that. I mean, and Hillary, was trying to look show how tough she was. It what blows my mind, and I don't really have a dog in this fight anymore. Like, the quick thumbnail is when I was about 13, I got born again behind my dad's back. And my mom was Catholic, and they had a weird deal, so they wouldn't talk about religion to the kids, but they were going to be Muslim. That was the short story. Then I kind of got saved on my own and did the religious thing for about 10 years. And around my early 20s, I'm like, I don't have a dog in this fight anymore. I was asking too many questions. So that being said, I've probably forgotten more Bible than most people know, right? And the thing that kind of always amazes me is when people talk about how violent Islam is. And I'm like, all right, well, yeah, there's violence in it, but, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, the book of Revelations, those 4 books alone are more violent than the entire Quran combined. Those 4 books alone get into, killing the unbeliever. Joshua's bragging about, slaying Philistines with the jawbone and all this kind of, and that's what they get. And God's a smiteful God, right? It's the Torah with a little modification. But that's more.
But you know what? What I find offensive is if people who live in a country that over the last 200 years committed one of the worst genocides on earth by eliminating almost the entire Native American population,
right,
by committing a Holocaust of unbelievable proportions when they invaded Africa and brought in slaves and kept slaves here under such horrifying conditions.
Right.
That dropped 2 nuclear bombs and murdered God knows how many innocent civilians. That destroyed Southeast Asia with Agent Orange and God knows what other horrific things they did. They are preaching Muslims?
Yeah.
They have a place to preach? They have a place to tell anybody, to pretend like they have some kind of moral high ground?
Yeah.
This country?
Yeah.
And then the entire West has got, of course, a history of imperialism and colonialism, which is, what some of these countries did makes Hitler, I swear to God, makes the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, look small in comparison. You know how many millions of Africans were killed in the slave trade? Died?
Well, and then here's the thing. So,
do we even know how many Native Americans were killed? Do we even know how many people they killed in Southeast Asia and in Vietnam, Vietnam, Cambodia, nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs in Japan?
Sure.
What are we even talking? Who are they? Who are the people in the West, and particularly the United States, to lecture the Muslims? When Jews were being persecuted by Christians in Europe, they escaped to the Muslim and Arab world. This is well known.
Yeah.
And we're welcome there. So, this is part of that same propaganda you were talking about.
Right.
But, a lot is being invested in it. Some of it you can see even in school books, in high school and middle schools, social science books. It's that deep, it's that thorough. And then it's a tough battle that we have to combat. That's why I wrote that book about the Holy Land Foundation 5. That's why I talk about Islam, and I talk about Hamas, and I talk about the Muslim Brothers. People need to have some education, a basic one, even if they read a few pages. But just to have some idea, some context.
But see, here's the thing, though.
What is happening here?
But here's the thing, though, and all your points are incredible and valid. But here's the challenge: people like to be dumb on purpose and cute by half. I have had this discussion with people, and you have too. And the first thing they'll do is make excuses. Oh, well, that was a long time ago. Get over it. Well, then don't bring up Jesus to me, as Bill Hicks said, because that was a long time ago. It's like 2,000 years ago. Who the fuck cares? I didn't ask him to die for my sins. So, but it's the same deal. Like, that happened a long time ago. Get over it. Or Vietnam. Well, that was different. That was war. We killed 2 million Vietnamese. The numbers fluctuate between 1.5 million and 2 million. We lost 60,000 of our kids for nothing. Yeah. And so, but right there, that is a third of the Nazi Holocaust. And then you throw in another 1.5 million of Korean civilians we killed, carpet bombed. Okay, now we're at half, if not 2/3 of the Nazi Holocaust. and then you could just throw in the rest. Cambodia.
So the West has no leg to stand on to preach anyone. Certainly not the Arab world or Muslim world.
Right.
But that's what they do. And then again, people say, people have an excuse for everything. The most ridiculous claim Israelis and pro-Israelis make is, that the Palestinians, there are 5.5 million Palestinian refugees that have a right to return to their homes and are waiting to the day that they can return to their homes. Some of them are, it's their descendants, their children and grandchildren, but they're sitting in refugee camps and waiting to come home, which they have the absolute right to do, and I believe is something that must absolutely be allowed to happen. It's called the right of return. So when you bring that up, they say, yeah, well, that was a long time ago. Palestinians need to get over it. But the claim that Jews had a right to go to Palestine, and by the way, a lot of people don't realize that, until about 100 years ago, there were only a handful of Jews living in Palestine. Right. And then only since 1948, the numbers have grown and the name has changed to Israel. Originally, the name of this place was Palestine. Right. And so their claim is because they say that all Jews are the descendants of this tribe that used to live in that region 3,000 years ago. So the Jews have a right because of 3,000 years ago, although there's not a single Jewish person that can show you where their house was.
Right.
Or where their land was, or can prove to you that they're actually connected and related to that land. Palestinians have the deeds to their homes and the keys to their homes.
Yes.
Still.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But they have a right and they don't. So 70 years is too long, but 3,000 years. And it's the exact same kind of a stupid argument, And I believe in reparations too. I think until blacks in America get reparations, then the racism in America will not end. The issue of the transgressions and the racism against blacks is not going to end until this issue is brought up front and center. And again, there are very few members in the U.S. Congress who are willing to bring that up. Right. They're mostly afraid to bring it up. Right. But these issues have to be dealt with. They have to be made front and center.
Even Reagan
say that about blacks in America.
Well, even Reagan gave reparations to the Japanese that were interred.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the Germans paid billions, still are paying billions to Israel, and that money's not even going to the
families,
to the survivors. It's going to the state of Israel, who's keeping the money. They're not even giving the money to the people who deserve it.
Yeah, well, welcome to government.
And and people say, same thing. They say, blacks need to pull themselves up and forget it. Why should they forget it? The what we see today, the conditions in which Black America exists, are largely still because of slavery and Jim Crow and all of that.
Right.
And it's not going to change. And when you look at the contributions of blacks in America, in every field imaginable,
science,
literature and poetry and theater and God knows what else. Imagine if, and they're only 13% of the population. Imagine if blacks were, allowed the same privilege as white people in America. So I mean, it's the same argument. They always bring up the racists and the apologists and the so-called kind of liberal racists. Always bring up the same lame argument, right. and it's important to challenge them straight on and say, no, this is absolutely not true. Here are the facts. Here is how we have to resolve this, and justice has to be the standard.
Sure. Well, let me ask you something really quick, because we touched on this a little bit the last time you were on, and I'm just going to spitball, like in a perfect world scenario. It will happen probably in my lifetime, but I'm not holding my breath. But if reparations were to go...
Hold your breath. You can hold. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hold your breath. Turn blue.
I'm an optimist.
And you are. No, you are an optimist. The first time you came on the show, I'm like, this guy is not a cynical asshole like I am. I mean, so I trust me, I appreciate that. But let's talk of like a quick bullet-pointed kind of a strategy if we were to do reparations for the Palestinians. For example, now we're 2 or 3 generations into the state of Israel, right? And there's people that have bought property and everything else as a right of return. Let's just look at that. Is it possible to make a monetary compensation to Palestinians and then allow them to buy property in Israel, or are we talking to get their specific property back? Like, what kind of things could we look at realistically?
Well, within the existence of this, if we're talking about the existence of the state of Israel, none of this can happen.
Okay.
Because the law is that 97% or so of the land can only be sold or leased to Jews. Palestinians can't even buy their land back, even if they wanted to.
Wow, and that's not fascist, right? That's a free democracy, huh?
That's not racist at all.
Yeah.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And to say that Palestinians don't have a right to self-determination in Palestine, only Jews do, is not racist either. But that's a whole other issue.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're talking about is we call the post-Zionist reality. In other words, beyond the state of Israel, just like in South Africa, apartheid collapsed, and a new thing came up, and of course they had Nelson Mandela. Apartheid collapses, the state of Israel collapses, and they have free and fair elections, one person, one vote, everybody gets to vote, and we have a legislature and an executive that represents all the people equally. Right now, only Israelis are represented, really. Palestinians do not have a say, and so do not have a voice. So,
boy, a real quick side note: I always hear the argument that they're allowed to run for office, they're allowed to be judges.
They are, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, good.
I knew you were going to say.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
They are, and some Palestinians in certain situations, and I'll talk about that if you want. But just say.
Okay.
But really, they're not. The Palestinians, as a nation, as a people, do not have a voice in the politics of Palestine because Israel is in control. So we're talking about a reality where it's no longer Israel; it's a free Palestine. It's a democratically elected legislature that includes the voices of everyone, including Israelis, of course, and an executive and so forth. So now, for the first time in history, we have a legislature and an executive that represents all of the people, Palestinians and Israelis included, who live between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea, from the river to the sea. Okay? Now, there are a lot of issues. Now the work begins. In other words, it's like when apartheid fell and Mandela became president, now the work begins. This is just step one. Now we have the refugees that deserve reparations and return. There are water issues, land issues, citizens. There's lots of issues to resolve. When it comes to the refugees, the way I view it, they have a right to come back and get their land back. In cases where the homes are there, get their homes back. They deserve 7 decades worth of reparations. If the homes were there and Israelis lived there, they got to pay them, or the government's got to pay them, because in some cases the government put the people in these homes. The land that was used, highways have been built, shopping malls have been built, universities have been built, neighborhoods have been built on Palestinian land. Almost the entire state of Israel is built on stolen Palestinian land.
Absolutely.
Well, I should say all of it, actually. The Negev Desert, they kicked out people and they put forests in their land instead of whatever. They don't allow them to cultivate. The crazy stuff. Now, how is this done is what needs to be figured out. Now, reparations have been done before, so we can take a look at other examples. Repatriation of refugees has been done before. We can take a look at different patterns. Creating a nation out of two sides that were at war for a very long time has been done before too. Multinational and multiracial states exist everywhere, not only in Europe, but other parts of the world. And of course, the South Africans had, I think, two things that would be great to learn from. One was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which helped to bring about some reconciliation and forced the perpetrators of crimes to tell the truth. And again, it brought a little bit of a sense of closure. And the other thing, they have a very progressive constitution. They put together one of the finest constitutions in the world today, which of course is a challenge because now you've got to make sure that you're living up to it. But that's a whole. So there are examples and samples around the world of how this can be done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to make it fit our particular situation in Palestine. Now, this could be in form of free education. This can be in terms of reparations. It could be in ways of tax exemptions. It could be. There's lots of different things that the government can do to help people financially. It doesn't have to be cash, brown paper bag with cash. It could be lots of other things. It could be generations. And this has, by the way, come up as well when the issue of reparations here for blacks in America. It could be free education. It could be all kinds of different things, tax exemption, who knows? All you have to do is sit down with a few smart people in the room and figure it out.
Right.
And that's exactly how I envision the Palestinians' right of return. They've been living in squalor, in poverty, under enormous difficulties of violence, attacks from the Israelis. And I'm not only talking about the refugee camps in, say, Gaza or the West Bank. We're talking about refugee camps in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan. The conditions are horrifying, and there's no reason for these people to live in such poverty. Their homes are an hour drive, usually 2 hours drive sometimes, from these horrible refugee camps. Israel has banned them from returning.
Right.
That's why they live like this. And they're highly educated people. In South Africa, they have 40 million impoverished blacks who never had an opportunity to go to school. Palestinians are a highly educated society. So people are ready to go to work the next day. So the chances of success are very, very high.
Right.
But that's what needs to. That's how I envision it. That's what I believe needs to happen, and I believe will happen.
Well, so so a real quick, run up to speed here. So, for example, the UN partition of 1947 did deign an Israel and a free Palestine. So what happened in 1948 that now Israel is Israel and they've just been encroaching ever since? Well,
the partition envisioned, just like the name suggests, it's called the Partition of Palestine. And that was a UN resolution that was passed at the end of November 1947. It was not fair, it was not just, but it did envision two states, a Palestinian Arab state on less than 50%, even though the Palestinian population was 3 times larger than the Jewish population, and the Jewish population on close to 60%, even though they were far smaller. But the Jewish community that existed in Palestine at the time were mostly immigrants, and people like my parents who were born there, first generation. They had a plan. They had a very strong militia, well armed. They had mapped every Palestinian village, every Palestinian town. They knew the number of people in each village. They knew all the routes leading in and out of the village. They knew they had a mosque, where the church was, where the school was, exactly how they were going to kick people out, and where they were going to kill them, and how they were going to take over the village. So, in other words, when in the partition plan was passed, the resolution was passed on November 29th, 1947. By the end of December, tens of thousands of Palestinians had already been kicked out. Then it continued till the end of 1948. So for an entire year, this very well-trained, well-armed Israeli, became the Israeli militia, this Jewish militia, the Haganah and so forth, in which my father was an officer, went on a rampage. They completely ignored the partition. They had no intention in partition. They wanted as much of the land with as little of the people. And they did it north, center, and south. They went on a rampage, and they destroyed, and they burned, and they forced into exile close to 1 million people, destroying hundreds and hundreds of towns and cities, including churches and mosques and schools and homes and you name it, And at the end of that, which was, the end of 1948, beginning of 1949, they had 80% of the country, and they were quite pleased. And they left a little bit of it, the Gaza Strip, which was the place that was created really to push in refugees, because they needed a place to push refugees, so that was one place. And the West Bank, which again, Israelis drew. And they said, well, we're going to give that part of Palestine to Jordan, which is another country that was newly created on the other side of the River Jordan. So that's what happened. In other words, the Zionist establishment, which then became the Israeli establishment, had no intention to allow the partition plan. They had a plan of ethnic cleansing that was already in the drawers 10 years before that.
Right.
And they just waited for the opportunity. And what the partition plan did is it gave a legal stamp to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. And as soon as that was done, boom, they had the plan. And like I say, but by the end of December, there were already tens of thousands that were out. And, and then by April, half of Palestine had already been destroyed and half the population was kicked out. And then again, by the end of the year, Palestine was completely destroyed. Palestinian society was destroyed. There was very little that remained. And immediately they began building for Jews on this land.
Wow.
The Israeli writer, Amos Oz, a very famous writer, just died. And he was a typical Zionist liberal, pretending to be a dove and loving peace, but supporting everything Israel had done.
Right.
Pretty much, almost everything. He lived on a kibbutz that was named after a Palestinian town that was destroyed, Hulda. And then he lived in the Negev Desert in a city that was in a colony that was established by Israel on land from which Palestinians were kicked out in 1948. In other words, there's no way that you could be a Zionist, that you can support the state of Israel without being a supporter of ethnic cleansing, of land theft, of genocide.
Right.
There's no other way. And then, of course, the apartheid system that's in place under which Israelis and Palestinians live. Israelis have all the privileges, and Palestinians live in or several entire different legal systems, depending exactly on where they live. So, I mean, that is the reality. This is something that we have to come to terms with. This is something that we have to expose. This myth that the Arabs didn't accept 1947, and then they attacked the Jews, and the Jews defended themselves. This is all complete baloney. It has nothing. It has no historical foundation, because we know that immediately after the partition plan was passed, the Zionist militias began storming Palestinian towns and destroying them and kicking people out at a very, very heavy cost of human life.
Well, and then the way that Israelis treat Jews, I mean, Iranians, Iraqis, Ethiopians, they're not white European Jews. Don't they get a different treatment?
Well, yes. What happened was, that's a whole other interesting and sad story. Mm-hmm. After the State of Israel was established in 1948, and then, the aftermath of the Holocaust, in the early 1950s, and they're realizing the Jews aren't coming. They wanted rich white Jews. Of course, rich white Jews had no interest in coming to live in this place.
They had a hard pitch in the 20s.
They were hoping.
They had a hard pitch in the 20s, too. The Zionists were trying to get Europe.
Yeah, I mean, nobody was interested. Yeah. They were willing to give some money, but nobody really wanted to go live there. Then they thought, and then they thought, well, maybe the Holocaust survivors. But the Holocaust survivors had no interest in living there either. A very small percentage of Holocaust survivors actually went to what became Israel, and many of them left because it was a terrible place, and they were treated very poorly. So nobody came. All the white Jews didn't want to come. So then they came up with this idea of bringing the Arab Jews, the Jews from North Africa, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon, from Yemen, and so on. And they weren't interested either. They had a good life. Iraqi Jews in Baghdad, they didn't want to leave. The Syrian Jews, they didn't want to leave.
Right.
Certainly North Africa and Morocco, they didn't want to leave. In Yemen. And so the World Zionist Organization began scheming and planning how to get them to move. So there was cajoling, and there was lying, and there were promises. In some cases, as in Baghdad, the Mossad was actually sent to put bombs in synagogues.
Wow.
To scare people away and to create this rift. And basically what they wanted to do was to create a rift between the Jews, the Jewish communities who had lived in these Arab countries very well and in peace for centuries, to create a rift between them and Arab society, and to cast doubt as to their real loyalty. That's exactly what they did. And that's why in many cases, in the end, they had no choice but to leave. In some cases, they believed the lies that the Zionists told them, and they came expecting God knows what, and they were treated terribly. They were put in camps themselves from which they were not allowed to leave. And they were used as labor because there was no labor, and they didn't want to use Arab labor. They wanted Jewish labor, but my family wasn't going to be laborers. We were too important, and we're white, and we're educated. If the Jews that came from Iraq, they sprayed them with DDT, sent them to camps, and then sent them to the ports to work in the ports and to do all kinds of hard labor, regardless if they were doctors or professors or engineers or God knows what. And of course, many of them eventually went to Europe or came to America because they didn't stand a chance. They had no opportunities in this newly founded Jewish state because they were dark. They're basically Arabs. They're a little bit better than Arabs, but they were basically Arabs. So that was their fate, and that's a whole other interesting story. But what I find particularly interesting talking about this, there's one community that's indigenous to Palestine that opposed Zionism from the very beginning, and these were the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the Haredi Jews.
Right.
They, in 1900, all the important rabbis of the world, and mind you, this was before World War II, so Europe had huge communities of Orthodox Jews and some very, very significant rabbis. They came out with a book that they published explaining why Zionism was a curse, basically, why it was dangerous for Jews to follow Zionism, and why the world needs to stop the Zionists as quickly as possible. And they said basically three things. They said Zionism is going to bring violence to the Holy Land. Zionism is going to bring, and the idea of a Jewish state is going to create a rift between Jews and Arabs. And Zionism is going to create cast doubt as to the loyalty of Jews in all the different countries which they live. Because and then they were right on all three. Then they said, according to Jewish law, strict Jewish law, Jews are prohibited from sovereignty in the Holy Land. So how can you claim to create a Jewish state when it is clearly prohibited by Jewish law?
And is that because the Messiah has not arrived?
That's because, according to Jewish law, or to the Jewish law and tradition, the Jews were expelled from the Holy Land for certain reasons by divine intervention, and until divine intervention comes and says they can come back, they can't go back.
You mean the UN is not divine intervention?
Not enough, and neither are the Zionists. And the thing is, the Zionists hated the Orthodox community; they still do. Mm-hmm. They are secular, which of course contravenes. How could you be Jewish because Judaism is a religion?
Right.
Now they said no. We're not just a religion; we're a nation. But the Jewish concept of the Jews as a nation is not the same as a regular nation. What unites Jews as a nation is their faith. So it's not religion. It's not language, land, and a political structure. It's their faith. That's why you can have Jews speaking 1,000 different languages and living all over the world, and they still see themselves as a nation because they follow a certain faith, a certain set of laws. The Zionists said, no. We have a different interpretation. We are a nation. Our history is the Bible, and our land is Palestine. And therefore, we're a nation like everybody else, and we need to return. It has nothing to do with being religious. So this community of Orthodox Jews, when the State of Israel was established, the ones that were native to Palestine, begged the United Nations to allow them to not accept Israeli citizenship. They did not want Israeli citizenship. And today, and of course, nobody listened to them. And today, many of them, of course, still oppose the State of Israel. Some are actively anti-Zionist, some are just non-Zionist. But today in the U.S., for example, when you drive up, upstate New York, you see enormous communities. And all of these communities are of ultra-Orthodox Jews, particularly they're called Satmar. And all of them are descendants of survivors of the Holocaust. They're Hungarians. So, they're Auschwitz survivors. All of them oppose the State of Israel. None of them have a problem discussing the Holocaust, debating the Holocaust. If somebody says that there was no Holocaust, they're happy to debate them. They don't have an issue with that. And they're growing very, very strong. And there's a community in the UK, and there's a community in Montreal, and Canada, and so forth. And they are all Holocaust survivors, deeply religious Jews, and deeply oppose the State of Israel and always have done. So we have, this is a voice that is rarely heard. I'm kind of been working with them and involved with them. I'm hoping to write a book about this community, as my next book. But I think this is an incredibly important story that people don't realize. Right. People think there's some kind of an unimportant minority.
Right.
They're growing in numbers. In the UK, 3 out of 4 Jews being born is of that community, the ultra-Orthodox community. So they're, a very big percentage of the community over there, and they're completely happy to support the Palestinians, and as they do regularly, they're out there in all the protests and so forth. So that's another story of this, piece of this puzzle, piece of the story that needs to be discussed and needs to be exposed.
Well, let me ask you something really quick, and then we got some time left, but I wanted to, we touched on it a little earlier, and I wanted to kind of cover it. I've got a lot of Israeli friends, a lot of Jewish friends, and we go back and forth on this stuff. And, one of the points they like to bring up is, well, they got judges and politicians and doo-da. And I'm like, yeah, but isn't it limited, though? It's not like they got the same rights as, say, Bibi, right? I mean, so what am I missing there?
Well, so... Palestine is a country from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Mm-hmm. Israel was established initially, or the original borders of the State of Israel were not from the river to the sea. There was this thing that, like I explained earlier, the Gaza Strip was sliced as a place to push in all the refugees, and that was given that was not part of the state of Israel, and the West Bank, this strangely shaped area, was also kind of penciled and kept outside the state of Israel. Now, those are called the 1948 borders. Within those borders, the Palestinians that remained after Israel was established were given kind of a quasi-citizenship. Mm-hmm. For the first 20 years, they were under military law and curfews, and not even a small semblance of democracy. Then the military law was taken off, and they became just almost normal citizens. But there are countless of laws in the Israeli law books that give me preference over them. Mm-hmm. And give me privilege over mm-hmm. them. Basically discriminate against them. Some 55 laws, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then there was the law, the nation-state law, which just came out. So they can vote, but only that population today is close to 2 million people, and they are allowed to vote, and they are allowed to run for office. And their vote always makes up about 10% of the Israeli House of Representatives, the Knesset. Israel has only one house, it's called the Knesset, mm-hmm. with 120 seats. Mm-hmm. And their vote makes up about 12 or 13 seats. And it's always been that way, and everybody knows exactly how many votes they're going to get. Now, Israel is one voting district, so there are no constituents. There's only a party. You vote for a party, and the party decides who goes in, and that's it. There's no constituents that the members of the House of Representatives go back to. Now, there are 13 members of the Knesset who represent what they call the different Arab, Palestinian parties. They're kind of more progressive. Well, some of them are progressive, some of them are not, but they united into one group, and they ran as a single group, and now there are 13 of them. Okay, 13 out of 120 is 10%. Now, because they're Arabs, they're not permitted to be in any important committees. Security matters, state matters, international matters, nothing at all. No Israeli government will ever allow them to sit in a coalition now, because it's a representative. And there's lots of different political parties. There's never one political party that wins. It's a political party that gets the most votes has to create agreements with other smaller parties so that they have a majority, which is 61 or more. Nobody will ever have them in a coalition, ever. It would be, no Israeli government will ever do that, and no Israeli government will ever rely on them in order to pass a bill. In other words, if they want to pass a bill,
they talk to everybody else.
Bill into law. They talk to everybody else, and nobody cares how these guys vote. Then again, 13 out of 120, you don't really need their vote.
Right. So what do they vote? So what do they vote on? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what?
Well, they said there are certain committees, certain issues that they're allowed to be in, certain issues that they care about, but they can't really influence. They can't really even improve the lives. In their case, we know who their constituents are because mostly Palestinian citizens vote for them. A few Israeli citizens, Jews do, but mostly Palestinian citizens do, and they can't help them. They can't do anything for them because they don't have the votes. They don't have the power. So Palestinians have serious water issues because Palestinians are given different amounts of water than Israelis. And we're talking about citizens within the state of Israel.
The next question.
And so they have, you'll have a Jewish colony, a Jewish settlement. I'm talking about not the West Bank, across the street from a Palestinian town. The Jewish settlement was built on the lands of the Palestinian town. The Israeli Jews get all the water they want. Palestinians have to have these special tanks on the roofs of their houses because they need to store water while the water is running, because they stop the water flow after a certain number of hours. And again, depending on specifically where they live, determines how much water they get. In some places, they have Palestinian towns which the state calls unrecognized. We're talking about several 100,000 people, and they live with no services at all. No water, no electricity, no roads. If you need to get an ambulance, there's no way to call and get an ambulance, bring an ambulance. There's no road to get to you. They have nothing. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. So, and these are all with Palestinians who live within the boundaries of the state of Israel where they got citizenship. These are citizens. You think I grew up, I ever had a day without running water as much as I wanted?
Mm-hmm.
To drink, to shower, to wash. Nobody, it was, you talk to Palestinians who are younger than I am. They remember the day electricity was finally, they were connected to the wire, they were finally connected to the water, and had running water or a bathroom inside, inside the house. That they didn't have to go out to an outhouse. People who are younger than me who were also born within the same boundaries and supposedly have the same citizenship. So some of it is laws, some of it is just racist reality because they're Arabs. But that is, and these are conditions of Palestinians who actually have Israeli citizenship.
Wow.
And yes, they're allowed to vote, but the vote doesn't count. And they're allowed to run for office, and they have absolutely no power whatsoever.
Wow.
And that's how Israel gets away with saying it's a democracy.
It's not even close. It's not even close.
Right.
It's not even close.
It's a democracy if you're an Israeli Jew. If you're an Israeli Jew and you're a citizen like me, then you have democracy. Then you have, you can discuss anything. Nobody listens, but you can talk about anything. You have all the rights. Whatever. You get arrested. You have, any rights like any liberal democracy.
Right.
If you're a Palestinian, God help you. It's a completely
different story. I mean,
that's the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, listen, Miko, we got to start wrapping up, but do me a favor. Is the 10 years too long? Is there a website for that, or is it 10yearstoolong.com, or what is that?
No, there isn't one. Unfortunately,
okay.
Nobody's quite that organized. It's a hashtag. But like I said, get the book. There's a wonderful organization called the Coalition for Civil Freedom, who do a lot of great work for these particular prisoners and other prisoners that have been, wrongly prosecuted, wrongly convicted. If you go to civilfreedoms.org and see what they do incredible work, and I work with them, and we've done things. I've done lectures with family members of different Muslim and Palestinian. Muslims and Palestinians who are who have been wrongly imprisoned, and check out them. Civilfreedoms.org, and again, just you can get my book. I mean, all the information is
100%.
there.
It is an amazing. It is an amazing book. I mean, I hope it's getting into a lot of hands because
thank you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what you pack into 200 pages, Oscar Wilde couldn't do better. I mean, it's dense. You went through.
Wow.
Seriously, the picture of Dorian Gray is only 170 pages, and it's like, it's a dense story, and you packed like a miniseries literally into a. This book could be made into a miniseries, and it's only a couple hundred pages. It's a lot of information. I mean, and the stories are heart wrenching because it's like you said, these are good guys. They're good guys. They're not looters. They're not, they weren't criminal guys. They were just trying to do the right thing and did it for a lot of years. Yeah. And then, they just got made into scapegoats. But anyway, listen, folks.
Well, thanks for saying that.
No, man, I appreciate you. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. It's stuff like this to get people out there. I mean, I've been at this about 6-7 months now, and, we're getting more and more audience, and I just want them to get something else that they're not going to get. When I talk to people in my personal conversations, it drives me crazy to hear them recite, Fox News or MSDNC, and like little good kids. Well, what they do now, just shouldn't,
right.
It drives you crazy. Yeah. And you got the patience of Job, no pun intended, to like
not always. Yeah. If you ask around, you might hear, not always, but I appreciate the thanks. I'm in it to win it. Let me tell you something. I mean, I'm in this to win it. I don't think anybody should be on, working and doing stuff on this issue unless they're serious about really winning and seeing a real free democratic Palestine. Mm-hmm. So I encourage people to do it. I believe it's realistic. But you have to be in it to win it because it's a tough gig.
Yeah, it is, and it's
a right gig, but it's a tough.
Well, and and that's the thing too. You can't keep expecting hegemony to exist and create a healthy atmosphere. I mean, my definition of hegemony is when you punch somebody in the face, you're shocked that they punched you back, and even more surprised that they didn't pay you for the privilege. So, that's kind of what we've been doing. And that's, like you mentioned, colonialism, imperialism, and everything else. But folks, my guest has been Miko Peled. He's an author, activist. He's the writer of the books The General's Son, A Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. We've been talking about that book and some other topics today. I recommend you get that book. Again, you can become a bitter pill by visiting patreon.com/The Bitter Truth, and you can get some fabulous stickers and everything else we've talked about, and there's going to be some tiers coming out this year. And as always, folks, if this makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.